Welcome to Talk South Asian to me. My name is Michelle.
And my name is Anusha. Tune in every Thursday at 5 p.m. Central and hear us react to each other's stories about mental health and growing up in different South Asian households.
And remember, this podcast is not therapy. Engage with what feels entertaining and resonates with you and leave what doesn't. Woohoo! You ready?
I'm ready. Do you want to start us off with our topic of the day?
Ooh, it's an honor because you're leading this episode. Okay. Okay. Should we do a little silent drum roll?
Drum roll. That wasn't very silent on my part.
We're already on letter V, which is insane. Insane. It is venting.
Venting. We've all been guilty of this one. So let's find out. What is it all about venting? What can we say today that's going to fill our podcast? We'll find out. So, venting. I thought that we could start today with, as usual, defining venting.
Right.
But before I do jump into the definition of venting, I'm curious, this research, I had an idea of what I thought the research would look like, and I finished, and I had a very different research in hand. So, what do you, Michelle, think venting is? Do you think venting is good? Do you think it's bad? Do you think it's like both? I don't know. What do you think? What are your thoughts?
I think it's not good nor bad. Like, I think it's neutral. It's a form of expression, in my opinion.
Yeah.
And I think how and when you use this form of expression matters more.
Good answer.
So the research, I think the research, I don't know if there's going to be a lot of methodology and scientific research. I'm not sure if there will be. I haven't looked into it, so it'll be a learning curve for me. But I think there might be more articles about it. There might be different opinions about it. You're like,
yeah. Oh, yeah.
But I think it's just a coping mechanism or a form of expression. That's what, in my opinion, venting is.
Yeah. And you're totally right. There was a little bit of a debate. Some articles were like, venting is healthy, good for you, productive, necessary. Some articles were like, the research on that does not show that. Venting is not great. Venting is blah, blah, blah. So that's why I think it's so important to define it. But before I do define it, I'm curious to know, what do you think about venting being productive or not productive?
I don't know. I feel like this is a trick question. I feel like it depends.
It is a trick question.
Right? You're like, ooh, it is a trick question, Michelle.
Look at you.
I think it just depends. I think it just depends, again, on like, what is the purpose of venting? What's your intention, right? Like, what is, do you have an end goal in mind when you're venting, right? Like, all these different things play into this circumstance or like venting when it comes to whether it would be productive or not. Those are my thoughts.
Those are some very well thought out thoughts.
Oh, thank you.
That was some good critical thinking. Round of applause.
Thank you.
When
I appreciate
I was looking into it, I was not thinking critically like you were. My immediate reaction to venting was, oh yeah, venting. Yeah, that's not productive. That's not a good way of communicating. We need to be processing things, not venting. Okay. Well, here we go with the research. You ready for this?
Yeah. Well, before you still, it's very valid on how you feel, because I feel like in movies, social media, venting is portrayed that way.
Yes,
it is kind of portrayed in a way that, like, oh, it's very unproductive and it's kind of undesirable almost when someone's venting and then everybody else is like, oh, she's talking about this all the time, or he's talking
going
about
off again. Yeah.
Right. It's portrayed that way too.
Exactly. And that's kind of how I gave meaning to that word venting as well. So when I was doing the research and I saw these articles kind of both on both sides of it. Venting is good for you, it's helpful, it's productive. Venting is not good, it's not helpful, all of those things. I think the discrepancy there, because when I read through both sides of the argument for that one, the discrepancy there was in how you define venting. Because at the end of the day, they both said the same exact conclusions, which you already hinted at, which you'll see in a minute. But it's the way that we define venting. So venting, as defined by one particular blog on a mental health site called Found Care, says that venting is a healthy and helpful exchange between two people. A healthy venting session occurs when the listener supports the person venting by offering supportive responses, empathy for their situation, and actively listens.
Can you repeat those 3 things again?
Yeah. So a healthy venting session occurs when the listener supports the person venting by offering supportive responses, empathy for their situation, and actively listens.
Okay.
So
yeah. Healthy
venting.
Okay.
Right. Which I love the way that is said, healthy venting, because again, it points to that thing that we talk about all the time, how nothing is good or bad. It's on a spectrum of like the most healthiest to the not so healthy. And then it falls somewhere in between.
Right.
So basically, someone who engages in venting is aware of the emotional state of the listener, right? They're self-reflective rather than reactive and defensive.
Okay.
They are at least open to feedback or actively seeking a solution. So when you vent, you're not necessarily looking to vent in the heat of the moment. That's unhealthy venting, unproductive venting. Does that make sense?
Right, that makes sense.
It's still venting, but your intention with that venting, that's what makes it healthy versus unhealthy.
Yep, that makes sense to me.
Yeah.
Right? Like what your goal or your intention is when you're venting, that matters.
Exactly. If you're coming at it from a place of, okay, this is what happened, and like this is how I feel about it, and what am I going to do? I'm so confused. And you're like open to that feedback. You're coming at it from a more solution focused, introspective, curious mindset, productive, healthy, great kind of venting. But when we're coming at it from sometimes, it's okay to feel this way, but like when we're coming at it from a place of, I'm just too mad still and I can't, like, I don't even want feedback. I just want to be mad and I want everybody to be mad with me. That doesn't benefit us.
Right. Yeah. It's not really aware of the other person's emotional state, right? Like you don't want to kind of transfer your stress and your emotions to the other person.
Exactly. Which brings me to the second part of this equation, the other side of venting, which is emotional dumping.
I have heard of that.
Yeah.
Is that related to like trauma dumping?
Yes, it is.
Or is that different? Okay.
No, they're similar. The concept is basically the same.
Okay.
Yeah. So the idea is that in trauma dumping, people tend to be what you call, what I've heard people call, what is it? Energy vampires. When you just feel so drained having talking to that person.
Right.
Basically, the idea is that you unconsciously or consciously share your feelings or your thoughts or your perspective or whatever's going on with you, your situation, without any awareness of whether that person is in an emotional state to have and hold this capacity for you, without any awareness of what their emotional needs are. You just kind of, well, this is what's going on with me and I need you to be here. So boom, here it is. Emotional dumping, typically occurs when you are in that heightened reactive state, when you're just like freshly triggered, which is why it's important to like take a pause and like regulate first, get some distance first,
and process first,
process your own thoughts and emotions first, and then productively vent.
Right. That makes sense to me. I mean, yeah, like sometimes people use venting as a way to process.
Yeah, and that's totally okay. Sometimes if that's how people process, it's kind of like, writing down your thoughts, right? Sometimes people who journal, that's how you process. Sometimes people need a person to bounce ideas off of and process that way. And like, that's totally healthy venting still. Where it becomes emotional dumping is when you're not seeking any feedback, you have no desire for solution, and you're basically talking at the person and just want to vent.
Okay.
Yeah. So you're not talking to process, you're talking to just expel this anger and this thought and this feeling, and like just boom, boom, boom. Don't care about anything else. No thoughts, no feedback, no processing, no solutions, nothing.
Okay.
So to give you an idea, kind of further really highlight this, what does signs of emotional dumping look like? It's like I said, when you feel like you just, spent time with an energy vampire, you just feel so spent and used and underappreciated, or like just kind of like maybe you were in a neutral place, but now you suddenly are a little bit like wired and stressed out after the conversation. That's kind of signs of emotional dumping. Other things is like, when the person, your friend or loved one or whoever, calls or texts you repeatedly about their problem, but doesn't kind of pause to see like, hey, how are you doing? It's more, I need you, this happened, okay, I gotta go, bye. Like, it's about them.
One way.
Yeah, very one way. Yeah. And if you find an opening and you see some patterns and you are trying to provide some, constructive feedback, if they get really, like defensive and like they shut it down, they ignore you, they don't want to talk about it, but they still come back to you and expect you to be quote unquote the therapist for them. That's when it can start feeling really heavy and like almost like you kind of want to avoid this person. Those are typically signs of being emotionally dumped on. And really the only thing to do with situations like that is to set boundaries.
Yes.
Now, when I say that, I want to make it clear. I don't mean like cut this person off and like don't talk to them about their problems, ignore their problems, only be there for the good times. No, that's not what I'm saying. But it's about recognizing that you're allowed to have some space to be ready to hold space for them. You can't just be like on the drop of a hat, be ready to hold that space no matter what's going on in your life. So it's okay to say, things like, hey, I understand you're really hurt right now and I want to be there for you, but I'm not in the headspace right now in this moment for that. Can I call you back tomorrow? Are you free then? Even if it's like a delay of an hour, a day, or like a couple of minutes, just to get in that headspace so that you can hold space for them.
Right.
And, if this is something that you notice repetitively happen, which I think we all have had some friends or somebody who's, had repeated problems of some kind, right? It's okay to also be able to have a boundary. Something like, hey, I notice the situation keeps happening. It feels a little bit beyond me. Like, have you thought about maybe reaching out for guidance from, a therapist or a counselor who can help you work through this? For those moments when it just feels like this person keeps going through the same thing, not a lot is changing, and maybe they're trying to receive feedback, maybe they're not. It's okay to recognize you don't have to be the therapist in, your friend group. We get paid for that. Send them over to somebody who gets paid.
Right.
However, on the other side, healthy venting signs can look like when your emotional well-being is considered. When you're allowed to decide, hey, I have something to get off my chest. I have something to talk through. Do you have a second now to talk about it? Can we talk about it maybe sometime this week? Can you let me know when you're free? That's a sign of healthy venting. They're giving you space and time to show up for them. And also they'll be taking that space and time to gather a little bit more distance from the situation and continue to process their thoughts and feelings. Other signs?
Makes sense.
Having the opportunity to provide feedback, the opportunity to be listened to, in your perspective, being able to ask like, I don't know if this is what's going on in my situation. And like, I don't know, what would you do? What is your fresh set of eyes telling you about the situation? Being able to take this feedback and give opportunity for a two-way conversation.
Right. It's not one way.
Yeah. So that's, I think, the most important thing to recognize in terms of our conversation today about like venting is venting itself, again, not bad. But there is a way to productively, healthily vent in an unhealthy way that tends to
Right.
lean towards emotional dumping.
Mm-hmm.
And that's important to, I think, highlight because oftentimes I think what I often hear, and like I'm guilty of this too in the past, is sometimes we don't want to like burden our friends, burden our family
Right.
members. So then we don't bring up things that are bothering us or things that we want
Right.
people to, to provide feedback on. And I think it's
Right.
worth noting that these are the moments, these are the conversations that actually build connection and intimacy, like emotional intimacy between people.
Right.
That's a wonderful, important thing to have. This is how
Yeah.
you connect with people over shared struggles and like problem solving together. And it's a vital piece of connections. It's a vital piece of
Mm-hmm.
friendships, of
Right.
relationships. So venting itself is not a bad thing. It only becomes,
Mm-hmm.
that feeling of, I don't want to burden them and I don't want to,
Mm-hmm.
okay, well, let's practice healthy venting instead of,
Right.
emotionally dumping on people. I think that is an important distinction that can help some of the people pleasers out there like ourselves
Yes.
recognize there is a time and place for leaning on others, but just
Mm-hmm.
be cautious, or not cautious, be conscious and aware of how you go about it, with what intention you go
Right.
about it. Yeah.
Right.
Then I also read another article. I was doing my deep dive, you know how I do.
Yes.
And I found this other article by Greater Good magazine, written by Jill
Mm-hmm.
Sutty. She is a
Okay.
psychologist.
Okay.
And in her article, Does Venting Your Feelings Actually Help? She talks about how letting your negative emotions out feels good in the moment,
Mm-hmm.
but science suggests that it might make matters worse in the long run. So, what this particular statement is talking about, let me break that up for a second, is essentially back in the day, not too long ago, but back in the day, I say it like I'm super old.
You're not old.
Psychologists used to believe that, and maybe you've heard it too, like, like we need to cathartic, we need to have catharsis, we need to vent it out, we need to,
Oh yes.
if you're
The
angry, go punch a pillow,
catharsis.
go scream. Like you've heard these
Right.
suggestions, right? Yeah.
Right.
And up until
The
recently,
stress
I
ball.
was saying these suggestions. Yeah.
Yeah.
And here's the thing. When we're in that state of just heavy anger, heavy, like any of those really heavy emotions like that, if we vent it out, punch a pillow, scream, throw something, even like squishy, soft toys, pillows, whatever, it doesn't actually reduce our emotion.
Mm-hmm.
It increases it.
Mm.
And that's the exact
Interesting.
opposite of what we want, right? We don't want that. And for the
So like
longest
you're
time,
saying that the
mhm,
catharsis effect like increases and heightens the emotion. It is not a relief of letting it out.
correct.
What? This is completely
Especially with
opposite of what
emotions
I've
like
thought.
anger.
Oh.
Yeah,
But then why does
exactly.
like okay, like for example, like exercise.
Yeah.
It's a physical form of activity.
Mhm,
Is that different?
mhm. That's different. Yeah. So that's the
Oh,
distinction. I'm glad you brought that up because that's the distinction. Catharsis in general is not a bad thing. It's the way we go about catharsis. So when
okay.
we are angry, yelling, punching a pillow, and like throwing something, those are more aggressive acts. Those are not going to make us less angry. They're going to make us more aggressive and more angry. But if I'm angry and I instead go for a, like a really heavy, quick, like runny kind of a walk jog
Yeah.
thing, that's regulative. I'm
Mm-hmm.
using my breathing, I'm moving my body, getting out this,
Oh,
like
it's
anger energy
regulative.
out. That's going to
Gotcha.
decrease my anger. So do you see like the
Oh,
difference though? One is like
okay.
adding to the anger, one's taking away, because it's more about regulating your nervous system.
Yeah, there's no regulation
Versus
when
the
you're
other.
just like, yeah, like just punching a pillow, or there's no
Yeah,
regulation there.
exactly. Because think about it, you're using more energy and you're keeping your level of anger up, because if you're punching it, you have to like use this force and like you're angry still, and like,
Right.
so that's the difference. So the same concept applies to verbal venting. When we engage in verbal venting for the sake of verbal venting, just for the sake of being in a hostile aggressive mood and saying hostile aggressive words and tone of voice, we stay at that state. We are not actually having a productive venting session. Because if I'm in a heightened state of like, can you believe this person did this and they did this, and like, how dare they? I didn't deserve this. You know, you're stuck in that heightened state of anger, and you
It's like a
tend to
cycle.
ruminate. Yeah,
Yeah,
it's like a cycle.
spiral.
You ruminate.
You're spiraling. Yeah.
Exactly. You're not actually processing and coming down from it. But instead, if you go, like, this is what happened, and it was really frustrating, and like you're breathing through it, and like you're taking a minute to process, even if you're trying to do it in the moment, you'll get a different outcome.
That's
you're
good.
not ruminating in it.
That's new to me. I didn't realize that.
Yeah, it's fascinating.
Yeah, it
is. The article goes on to talk about some skillful venting skills.
And venting. Okay.
Yeah. And here are the skills that it talks about and it covers in the skillful venting section. It says, choose when you vent. So basically, you know, like take some time to understand the situation, gain some distance from the situation so you don't get sucked in and stay at that heightened level. And once you've regulated, once you've had a little bit of time to process, you can vent and process as you're venting, or just vent and receive feedback. And the second thing is ask for their perspective or an alternative way to perceive the situation. So again, going back to what we were saying, healthy venting and productive venting is all about trying to get somebody else's feedback. It's a two-way street, not just you venting at their face. So things like, how should I think about this differently? What do you think? What should I have done in this situation? Or what should I do now moving forward? You know, things like that, to start getting some fresh eyes on the situation.
Yeah.
The third skill I talk about in skillful venting is be selective of who you vent to. I think that's an underrated one. You know, it is important to consider, like, did this person really help me last time when I talked to them? Or did they just end up making me feel worse inevitably? Because I mean, it matters, right? Especially when we're younger. I don't know about you, Michelle, but when I was younger, I had two kinds of friends. I had the one kind of friend who would, if I was mad, they'd get mad. If I was, you know, angry, they'd get angry for me, you know, on my behalf. And so, like, that would have been the person not to vent to, because it wouldn't have been a productive venting.
Yeah.
The other kind of friend that I needed to vent to is, you know, the kind of friend that would just kind of sit and be like, oh yeah, that kind of sucks. I am mad for you. But why did that happen? You know, they'd be a little bit more curious, a little bit more of a third party instead of involved, you know, muddying it up, the situation. And the last skillful venting that they talk about is avoid online venting. I mean, that's just good sense, right?
Oh my gosh.
If you vent online, you will deal inevitably with bullying or trolling.
All the comment section, tweets.
Yeah, not worth it, guys. Not worth it. Vent in person. Don't vent online. And then the last article I want to talk about today is our favorite, Psychology Today. So I know, of course, Psych Today. There was an article on Psych Today by CBT therapist Dr. Kate Gapinski. And some of the key points in the article were as follows. 1, anger is generally a secondary emotion underneath which we protect more vulnerable feelings such as sadness, hurt, fear, or jealousy. That makes sense, right?
Yeah.
Anytime we're angry, usually it's not just anger. Usually we are in a self-protective mode against something that we are hurt by.
So there's an underlying emotion behind the anger, which makes sense.
And I think that's a great key point because I think it highlights the fact of like, yeah, when you're venting, vent, no big deal. But like, if you need a place to look of what's really going on, consider that. Why is your anger coming up for you? What is it trying to protect? What icky,
Right.
sad, defensive, hurt feeling is it trying to mask?
That makes sense. Very insightful.
Yeah. That's why I love anger. I think it's like the protective older brother who just makes things worse unintentionally.
When you say anger, like when you like immediately the Inside Out character popped up in my head. Did you see the trailer for the second movie?
I was
by the
just
way?
gonna say I did, and I'm so excited.
I thought of you immediately, but I was like, I'm gonna bring it up. So.
I love that. I love that I elicit this reaction in you. But yes, I saw it immediately, and I was so excited. I was like, "Oh my god, we're gonna get like." I think we're getting Anxiety. I think right that one's confirmed, and we don't know the other ones, but I'm so excited.
Yeah, they're like Anxiety had baggage, and she was like, "Oh, we wanted to make a good first impression," and everyone's like, "We."
I know, I'm so excited. It's gonna be great. I can't wait. I hate these teasers though because now I'm like excited and I have to wait so long I'll forget about it.
I know it's not that long. I think it's next summer. So
it's too long. I can't do more than a month.
Yes. Sorry. Side note. You were like, I love anger, and then the fire and the head.
That's exactly what I think of though. It's perfect. Like anger truly was the perfect depiction on screen of anger. I can't think of a better way to describe it.
He would vent too in that first movie.
Yeah, I loved it. I think it's
and
time
every
we go
time
back and
he would
rewatch.
vent, it was unhealthy venting because every time it would just keep getting bigger, the fire.
Yeah, it would just get worse and worse. Exactly. See? Yes, I know. Okay, let's see. The second key point from this article was that anger has evolved to help us stay safe, and we become angry when we encounter perceived or imagined threat, as well as actual physical threat. Yeah. I think that's a little bit of a background on the why of anger, which makes sense, right? We've often talked about how all our feelings, all our parts are usually a protective feature and usually have evolved in unhelpful ways as they show up to protect us. Yeah. And then the third key point was venting anger is likely to be helpful only if it is non-physical and is combined with a new interpretation of the experience. I really like that. I'm going to repeat it. Venting anger is likely to be helpful only if it is non-physical and is combined with a new interpretation of the experience.
So that's productive venting. So in other words, it's productive when you're going into it to gain a new perspective.
Exactly.
Right? And what was the first part?
Open to that. Yeah, and the first part was it's helpful when there's non-physical venting. So not like trying to punch a pillow or
right.
Going back to again like taking that space to verbalize our thoughts, verbalize our feelings, process through what happened, and then create a meaning. So our feelings come from our perceptions of the event. The event itself might be a neutral event. For example, I use this all the time in therapy. Like, for example, if you bump into somebody at the mall, you can have one of two reactions. Well, you can have a lot. We'll just focus on two. Yeah. One, you might think, oh, it was an accident. They were on their phone. They didn't see me. No big deal. Your feeling from that perception is going to be neutral. You're just going to be like, that's okay. Yeah. It's cool. The second perception could be if it was anger of like, wow, like they're on their phone. They don't even bother looking where they're going. Like they even saw me probably and they still bumped into me. So rude. That belief system is going to make you angry. Right? So our feelings come from our perceptions of the event. The event itself was
Which
neutral,
makes sense.
somebody bumping into you.
Yeah.
But how you see that event is how you feel about the event. So that's what this
Yeah.
piece is saying. So venting anger is likely to be helpful only if it's non-physical and combined with a new interpretation of the experience. If through processing it, you can come to a place of, well, maybe my perception wasn't necessarily right. Maybe the perception was this. Maybe it was this. Even if it's true or not, just going through the motions of what another perception could look like
Yeah.
reduces your anger.
That makes sense. This is very, very
Yeah.
eye-opening and insightful. This is a good
Yeah,
topic. I
I'm
like
glad.
it.
And the last key point from this article was, excuse me, that techniques that calm the body in combination with purposeful delay of action can allow us to skillfully respond versus react to anger.
Skillfully
Right?
respond versus react.
Techniques that calm the body in combination with a purposeful delay of action allows us to skillfully respond versus react to anger.
So calming techniques are important.
Yeah. Which is, again, at the end of the day, just regulating. So whether that's, through breathing, through taking a walk and just getting some distance to process. And basically that second piece of take time to think through and process through what's happening. Don't immediately react. Don't immediately jump to venting. Take a minute to process, to breathe, to regulate, do what you need to do, and then come into a place of venting. You'll be much more in a place and open to be productive.
Right. That makes sense.
Yeah, exactly. So my takeaways from my research today, all of the takeaways that I had, other than literally everything I just said, was that, chatting with friends, it definitely can help us bring, closure and a sense of understanding and a sense of peace, and it can be helpful to vent. But it's just how we vent that really matters. If we're venting from a place of, heightened emotions and we're not really open to feedback yet, we're very defensive still, it's just not helpful. And that's going to help us stay stuck, if anything, from moving forward, from moving on, from learning anything. The problem is sometimes, like you said earlier today, Michelle, like in this day and age, like that's how we interpret venting as. We see venting as just this thing where you vent when you're mad. You don't vent to understand. You vent when you're mad.
Yes.
I think nowadays we've given that other term, the healthy venting term, like I need to process my emotions. Can we talk? If, people have gone to therapy and they know therapy speak of processing emotions and whatnot.
Therapy
But
talk.
venting usually is reserved for that, like, I'm in an emotional state and I need to vent. I'm not yet in a place where I'm open to anything. I'm not calm yet. I just want to vent because I'm angry. I need somebody to listen. So I think it's important to recognize we as people give these things meaning.
Right.
So we can take it back. We can take it back. Whatever we call it. We can call it venting. We can call it processing. We can call it whatever. But we can take back these meanings and allow ourselves to indulge in effective use of venting, effective use of processing, again, whatever we want to call it. But at the end of the day, giving ourselves these skills, these tools to do it in a way that's helpful to us and productive to us.
Right. Yeah, that makes sense to me.
And as always, the biggest helpful thing, I think, always regulate. Always, always, always learn how to have a few different regulation tools in the back of your pocket anytime you need it.
Regulation is the key.
It really is in a lot of things. In how we approach life and how aligned we are in our choices and our values.
Right.
How intentional. Okay, well, that's it for my educational component of today.
I learned a lot.
I can share. You learned a lot? I'm so glad. I learned a lot too, because I did not realize all of this went into it either.
Well, like when we first discussed this will be a topic, I was like, oh yeah, this is easy. Like, this is something that we know and like,
yeah,
we're very familiar with it. I didn't expect to like learn so many new things about it. Majority of the stuff you said like not majority, not everything, but like a lot of the things that you mentioned
The little
were new to
nuances of it
me.
all.
Yeah,
Yeah,
and
I
were
know,
very
same.
eye-opening. Yeah,
Yeah, I'm glad. I know, I knew they would be. That's why today when I started, I was like, I can't wait for you to see the research.
I'm excited. I was excited when you said that. I was like, "Ooh, there's gonna be some new stuff then."
Like, you're gonna surprise me on this topic? All right, bring it.
Right.
But yeah, I also learned a lot of things doing this research, and it really it challenged my notion
Mm-hmm.
of what I believe to be true with venting. So
Yeah,
it was a fun topic to research today.
it is. But it seemed like it was a fun topic.
It was confusing
I'm
at first. I was
excited to
like, wait,
talk more
what?
about it.
Yeah,
You were probably going through like, well, it's like undoing a lot of things that we have been taught growing up or just in what we've seen in social media.
exactly. And, just
Mm-hmm.
media representation in general, like you said. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Okie dokie. Shall we talk about my story?
Yes, I'm ready.
Okay, let's do it. So I'll start off in a. I'm keeping my story pretty simple today, just kind of starting off like on a two-part, maybe a little bit
Okay.
about high school and college and like what
Mm-hmm.
my experience with venting was like then, and then post being a therapist and post therapy version. I feel like most of my life can literally be categorized as pre-therapy and post therapy.
And I feel like that's for me too. It's a big
Yeah,
pivotal point when you like do lots of work through therapy, and
it really is. It just
it makes
changes the way
sense.
you see things and process
Right.
things. So kind of it does feel like a pre and post situation
Yeah.
here.
Yeah.
So in high school and college, my primary experience with venting was definitely a bit more on the emotional dumping side. When
Mm.
you're that young and like heightened emotions and like heightened hormones are like definitely a thing. So I felt looking back now, I had a lot of friendships where I guess I've joked about this, but like I've always been the person that my friends come to talk about stuff with. Um, I took it and I do take it as a compliment. But that also meant that as a, young teen or like in early college, going through a lot of transitions, a lot of hormonal things, a lot of freedom, like
Right.
change and suddenly and all that, it did mean that I had ample opportunity in my friendships and the kinds of friends I
Mm-hmm.
kept to be on the receiving end of being emotionally dumped on. So I
Mm.
definitely had my fair share of energy vampires. Love them,
Mm-hmm.
still do.
Mm-hmm.
But energy vampires they were.
Yeah.
um And at the time, I was definitely a huge people pleaser, stuck in the ropes of all of that and the tangled up in the ropes of all of that. So I didn't really have the vocabulary or the desire to set boundaries. Unfortunately, young me, pre-therapy, didn't know how to do any of this
Mm-hmm.
stuff. Unfortunately, what that meant was I did lose a couple of friends along the way when I didn't know what else to do. And like I couldn't just be emotionally dumped on and like
Right.
almost like a in real life ghosting event. And it's not like I actually tried to ghost people in real life. It was more so like finding excuses. Oh, I can't do that. Oh, I can't do that. And like never being, direct with my boundaries like I should have been, but didn't know how to. Um,
It's
and
just
then more
valid.
so like, yeah, and more so when I got a little bit older, like in college and everything and find my voice a little bit. Still pre-therapy, but found my voice a bit, recognized, oh, I really don't have the space for this. I started voicing that a bit more. And I remember with two friends actually in particular, they had kind of reoccurring stuff happening in their life, whether with boys, romance
Mm-hmm.
department, whether with family
Romance
and like
department.
ushers department,
Yeah.
I felt like a lot of their stuff was kind of repeating. I'm like, that's okay. I'm going to hold space for them. Sure, they're my friends. I don't mind them telling me like 20 times the same thing. That's okay.
Yeah.
But the frequency of it kept happening often and often and often, so much so that I don't know if you remember, but I was kind of a little bit of a silly goose. I'm being very generous here with the word silly instead of something else. And I took 18 hours, if you remember, and lots of
Oh, I remember
extracurriculars.
this. We talked about
Yeah.
this.
And I was in the honors program it
Yes.
was some rough
Yeah.
stuff. And Yeah, you remember. And I was juggling those insane decisions on top of these friendships that required a lot of, time and effort. And I was literally a walking zombie, burnt out all the time, as you can imagine, sleeping, standing up.
Mm-hmm.
So I was in a place where I was kind of like forced to speak up and say something, and I did. And I was like, hey, I really want to talk about this, but like, I'm so sorry. I have like a midterm and like a, like a quiz, a pop quiz, a test, and I
Yeah.
gotta do this and I gotta do that. Like, I want to talk to you, but I really am running out of time tonight. Can we talk about this later? And I did that enough, and obviously that person stopped, reaching out as much.
Mm.
Again, because I couldn't hold the space the way they wanted me to hold the space. I'm like, that's
Right.
okay. That's
Right.
valid for that to happen. But it kind of sucks, to not recognize the other end of what emotional dumping can look like,
Mm-hmm.
the expectations and the disconnect that sometimes exists in friendships.
Right.
Um, and then now I have, I guess, one way or the other, whether I actively advocated or not, I guess you can think about it like this. I've weeded out the friendships that were very one way, very emotional dumping, very draining, and not very reciprocal,
Mm-hmm.
through active boundaries, and some just that fell through because of the nature of the relationship itself. And now I feel like I've surrounded myself with the kinds of friendships and relationships in my life where I create boundaries around leaning on friendships,
Mm.
and I demand that of them. Like, if they're like scared to be a burden, I'm like, no, no, no. I am free. Or, I'm really just not free today, but call me tomorrow. I want to talk about this with you. No, let's talk about it. And like, I'll
Yeah.
follow up, make sure they talk about it. So I've kind of
Yeah.
cultivated the kinds of friendships and relationships where we can still lean on each other. We can still be there for each other, but we can go about doing it in a way that's helpful for that person and for this person, right? Both ends of
Mm-hmm.
it. It's more
Right.
reciprocal. And like I said earlier, it's just for the best anyway, because sometimes when you're like, oh, like I want to talk about this, you probably could use maybe a little bit extra time to process, still, and like
Yeah.
process your feelings and how you think about this before you jump into it. Otherwise, have you ever had that moment where you like vent with a friend and then you hang up, but like you still have this energy in you, and so you call another friend and vent to them?
Yeah.
Yeah. It's because you were in a heightened state. You weren't even ready
Right.
to properly
Right.
vent. You just wanted to be angry and share that
Yeah.
anger.
Yeah.
But if done right, you don't have that need to do it. You could, just to like loop your people in to the
Mm-hmm.
situation, but you don't need, you don't have that urge.
Right.
So yeah, that's my experience with venting. I feel like I had a pretty, and I don't, I feel like my experience was very much like this is what I experienced, is what I experienced. I want to, disclaimer, I'm not saying I was not an emotional dumper when I was younger. 100%, I'm sure I was. I cannot think of a specific example, but I know I was definitely on the giving end of being an emotional dumper. When you're young, you got all those hormones, you don't know how to
Yeah.
regulate. You
This
inevitably
goes
are,
both
and that's
ways.
okay.
Yeah.
But now as adults, we can do better if we don't know how in the
Right.
past. We can
Right.
learn now.
Wow. Can we take a moment and to like reflect and applaud how much you've grown, just like based on
I
what
would
you've
love to applaud
said?
you.
Yes, like woohoo! Like look at just hearing you talk about it, and then also like being part of those different parts of your life, and just also witnessing the growth in you is just so special. And
Yeah.
your hard work and effort has really been fruitful. Like look at you now, like leading this whole podcast
Stress
episode about
free.
it. Right?
I agree. I agree. And you've definitely seen me through some of this change for sure. You've been
Mhm.
right front and center audience for some of these like friendships and the way they've gone. And it it was quite a journey. And you're right. I should take a pause and like be proud of myself, because honestly, like that was not easy. My
Mhm.
friendships were really important to me, and I was a huge people pleaser in my friendship. So me
Yeah,
having set
I
these
can
kinds of
relate.
boundaries and the kinds of friends I hold space for now, like that is huge. It's quite a change.
You should
Go
be so
little
proud of
Anisha. You
yourself.
did it.
Go Anisha! Woohoo!
You did it, little girl.
You did it. No, like it's not easy, first of all, to like reflect on and be aware of what you've been through and like how you've dealt with it and just like embracing boundaries, setting them in friendships, right? And dealing and coping with the results, whether, whatever that means and looks like.
Exactly.
But then again, like, coming on this episode and podcast and like sharing your experience and sharing your thoughts, like that's also not an easy task. So like kudos to you for not only like going through this journey and sharing going through this growing through this journey, but also like being vulnerable and sharing your experience on here.
Yes. Well, thank you, my love. You're so sweet.
Yes.
I always can count on your loving support, my little cheerleader.
Always. I'm doing a heart.
You. Me too. Heart back at you. Love you.
Love you. Oh. Did you have like other things? I didn't want to like cut you off. Were you finished with your story?
No, that's about it. That has been my experience with venting and work in progress, ongoing. But that's it for now.
No, it was very insightful too. Like you kind of tied your education research piece well to your story. Like how it can show up in our relationships, like friendships, and how it can how you can kind of deal with it too. I love the examples that you gave, right? Like the setting boundaries and how you can, like, I love the tangible examples you gave.
Yeah.
I don't have space right now, or I would love to talk about this tomorrow, or can I call you back in an hour? I really, really love those suggestions and like strategies. Yeah. Because it puts you in a place of good intent. Yeah. And it puts you in a place of good intent.
Exactly. It shows the person like, hey, I love you. I want to be here for you. But, life is happening. And like, unless it's absolutely an absolute emergency, I really need to get back to you on this. I think that is healthy and it needs to happen more.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And the not tiny little, it's still there. The little people pleaser in me is like, still like, that's hard. If you're a people pleaser and you've been people pleasing your relationships and your friendships for a long time, even saying something like that is a big deal. It's a big task.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, just take us, for example. How much do we really, like, we're constantly showing up for each other with lots of love, no judgment, constantly making space for one another. And yet, even when we talk to each other, we're still like, I'm so sorry, I love you. Thank you so much for understanding. And like, we like still do that whole, song and dance. So like, it's hard.
It is hard.
And I know, like, I can take the space with you and I still want you to know, like, I really appreciate you.
I know.
Every time.
I know, like the number of times you told me to take space, even though I didn't want, like, the people pleaser in me was like, no, I can't do that. You're like, Michelle, I'm telling you.
Do it. Do it now. No, I don't need it. What a cutie. I know. It's a struggle, but
it is.
It's okay. It's these kinds of friendships that at least allow us to experiment, make sure we feel safe in those environments to try that out.
Judgment free, right? We get to trial our learnings from therapy with each other.
Exactly. Sending lots of hearts your way.
Yes. I really, really resonate with you when you said like pre-therapy, post-therapy. Like it's a time period, like pre-therapy and post-therapy is a big deal. Like it's pretty prevalent for me too. Like I was very different in some ways, like pre-therapy on how I coped and how I dealt, how I vented, right? Like all these different, there's such a huge change in me and difference in me now that I've been going to therapy for a while.
Yeah.
So I kind of have my story a little bit structured that way too, but mine is more focused on family. So it's nice. We'll balance each other out. Yours
I love it.
is like friendships and I have like the family perspective.
Well-rounded together.
Right. There you go. So venting, when I was thinking of this topic, I don't know if you've seen these memes of like, and videos of like daughters and sons like joking about being their parents' therapist. Have you seen like those memes and TikToks and videos? Like everybody joking like, oh yeah, I'm like my parents' therapist. That's my, or being, if you're the eldest daughter or you're like, even like an only child, like you take that responsibility to help your parents cope. And I feel like I've talked about this before too, but this kind of goes hand in hand to this topic as well, is that I feel that I've experienced that at a very young age. Whenever I can think about this, like my parents venting and me having to like, not even venting, not healthy venting, unhealthy venting, which is emotional dumping, right? I'll use that term, like the emotional dumping, right? Whenever there was any family drama or something that's happened, an issue or challenge or a problem, I would be in the living room listening to my parents emotionally dump everything on me, you know? And these memories go back to like all the way till I'm like all the way back to when I was school age, you know? I wasn't even that, like not even high school or middle school yet. And I think for me, I have most of these memories with my mom because, and I adopted this from her too, the overthinking episode in the past. Like she overthinks and ruminates a lot. She tends to do that. She's better now, but she used to do that a lot too. And she would kind of overthink, spiral repeatedly. She would repeat things over and over again. And I would just listen. Like I would be sitting there with her and listening. And it would be very unproductive. Like it would go on and on and on. There was no intention, right? For a solution. There wasn't, like we talked about, there wasn't a regulatory process that happened prior. Like it was immediately when my mom was heightened in her emotions and she was just kind of bouncing back and forth from that. And that wasn't too healthy for me either, right? Because I was a kid. And I would say like pre-therapy, you know, I definitely adopted that mentality because I thought it was normal. And any issue that I would deal with and I would tend to overthink with I would also vent. It would happen over and over again. And this is pre-therapy. So of course, like during that was like one of the reasons I started therapy too. It was like I noticed these different things about me. It was like, oh, I don't like the fact that I'm overthinking this. I don't like the fact that this is the same thought is coming back in my mind over and over again. And that would lead to me like to vent. And I think my person that I would undeniably vent to was actually my sister and my fiance, or my boyfriend at that time before therapy, but my fiance. And it would not be healthy. Like I would kind of, and I so appreciate my sister because she like really helped me feel safe. And I never felt like I was people pleasing with her. Like I always felt comfortable like picking up the phone and calling her. But you know, we've had some productive conversations about this too, where like, you know, it would be sometimes multiple times if I was having a hard time like coping with something, and I would kind of vent to her immediately, and it would happen a lot around a similar issue. And I think therapy really, really helped me catch and adopt the regulatory piece that we talked about. Because when I do therapy, I'm talking to a professional, so feel like my beginning stage of therapy was focusing on how I can control my physical reactions or regulate my physical reactions. So when I would overthink, like I could feel my heartbeat fast, like sometimes my like chest would tighten, or like I like would shake or like fidget a lot. And so that was like a big piece of my beginning stage of therapy when I started, was like, how can I decrease those, or how can I help myself regulate? So I love that you said like tools in your back pocket. Like I have a toolbox now where I use to like regulate my emotions. And so once I achieved that, right, slowly my emotional dumping on my sister like kind of went away. And it started becoming like healthy venting sessions during therapy, where I'm processing, I'm doing talk therapy, I'm processing my experience, and I'm trying to be open to view my events and experiences in a different light, in a different perspective, what we talked about. And so that was kind of like my pre and post, like my personal experience. Sorry, I like jumped around a little bit, but like it started from adopting from my mom. And of course, I'm still to this day trying to convince my entire family to do therapy because it's so healthy. But, you know, we've talked about this. So going back to my parents, I talked about my mom a little bit, but my dad, his was a little different. He would kind of sometimes he keeps like things very internal, like he would
Yeah.
internally process a lot of things. And then if there was an inconvenience that he faced or if he was challenged, then it was like a long session of venting or a long list was
Mhm.
shared.
Mhm.
And I feel that I like through therapy, like I've learned to like set boundaries when those things types of things happen with my mom and dad.
Yeah.
I think in a little some ways like I've helped model us maybe unconsciously and subconsciously
Mhm.
on how to like regulate, but
Mhm.
it's very, very, very prevalent in both of my parents, the emotional dumping and the trauma dumping. Like even
Yeah.
something simple as like me and my mom going for a walk and then there's
Mhm.
something, happening with her family or our family and the whole walk kind of turns into like the emotional dumping session. So I think it goes back to like one of our previous episodes, right? There's a lot of intergenerational trauma in play when it comes
Yeah.
to family and venting and emotional dumping, trauma dumping. But like you said, it could become very, very energy draining and it could become like, could require a lot of time and energy. So I
Mhm.
do like sometimes catch myself like, of course, I'll hold space for my parents when they're venting or emotional dumping, but I'll like kind of not set boundaries in a very subtle way. Like, hey, like, how about you talk to this person directly about what's going on
Yeah.
instead of telling me, like, have you tried to talk to
Mhm.
this person? Like, trying to help them see a new perspective, but not directly,
Right.
you know? And
Right.
sometimes it's been worked. And then sometimes like, no, I don't want to, or like, that doesn't work like that, or whatever the reasoning is.
Right.
But that's kind of been my experience in my childhood home that like emotional dumping and trauma dumping has been very normalized. And so when I was
Mhm.
removed from my household and I was away from my parents and going to school and going to college, that's when I realized that this is not normal and I need to do
Mhm.
something about it. And I was like seeing the
Mhm.
reactions I would have when I would have to vent, right? Like the physical reactions, the heightened anxiety that I would
Yeah.
feel. And I think when reflecting on how I felt during those times, I think you're absolutely right. Whenever I would um, vent to my sister or emotionally dump on my sister, I would stay up there. Like, if I hadn't regulated myself, like my
Mhm.
feelings and anger or whatever I'm feeling in that moment, the heightened feelings, it would stay and I would spiral. I would go back and forth and I would kind of ask my sister questions to like look for validation, but it wouldn't really do anything because again,
Yeah.
my feelings were heightened.
Right. Yeah, you were like confirmation bias. Like you agree too, right? Like this is
Yeah.
ridiculous. This isn't okay.
Right.
You agree, right? Like that
Right.
validation of I'm
Right.
justified. And like you probably are justified, but just because we're justified doesn't mean it's always helpful to like sit in that justification, right? Like
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. So that's my experience with healthy versus unhealthy venting.
Mm. You've had quite a journey too.
I know it's insane how much things have changed, right? Pre to post.
I'm telling you. I think it's time in our podcast we start calling it BT before therapy, AT after therapy. Because that's what
BTAT.
it feels like. We can't call
BTAT.
it, PTPT, pre therapy, post therapy. They're both
Yeah.
PTs. We call it BT and AT.
Yeah. Yeah.
Oh my goodness. But yeah, I mean, I'm so glad that you pointed out the other side of it. We didn't plan it, but this worked out great. The friend side of it, the family side of it, like what that
Mm-hmm.
can look like. But not
Right.
just that. Like, thank you for sharing. The emotional, like in your body, emotional, not emotional, like the physical sensations that can come up when holding the space of venting, this anger, this
Mm,
unregulated, what that looks
right.
like, and
Right.
the kind of difference it makes when you can regulate. And everybody knows it, everybody's felt it, but like sometimes we forget to make that connection of like, oh yeah, these kinds of things that we talk about, it's a three-piece thing. It's our
Right.
thoughts, it's our feelings, like emotions, and our feelings, like our sensations. And I
Right.
think the last piece tends to get forgotten often, but
Mm-hmm.
it's a big part of it too. It's a big
It
part of that
is.
equation.
It is.
Yeah, well, thank you for sharing, Michelle, and I'm very
Yes.
proud of you too, and
Welcome.
all of the
Thank you.
struggle that it can be to get to this place, especially because, like you said, most of us don't really have this model to us. It's not until
Mm-hmm.
college where we get exposed to so many different diverse people and backgrounds and experiences that we realize this is not like normal, quote unquote normal, in the
Right.
sense that this isn't what everybody experiences.
Yeah.
And that's when it's time to really challenge that notion of, so should I be doing this or should I be trying something
Mm-hmm.
else?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
Yeah.
quite a journey, but I'm proud of you. Go little Michelle and big
Woohoo!
Michelle.
High five! Woohoo! Go little Anisha and little Michelle.
Love it. We're killing it. It's a struggle bus, but we're killing it. We're gonna keep going. It's
Struggle
okay.
us.
It's a work in progress.
That's the right terminology.
But yeah. So I suppose that's the end and the wrap of our
Yes. Shall I wrap up
topic
for
today on
us?
venting. I hope
Yes.
everybody learned a little something.
Yes. Should I wrap up for us?
Yes, let's do
Okay.
it.
All right, everyone. If anything resonated with you, or if you would like to share your thoughts or feedback, you can reach out to us at our email, talksouthasiantome@gmail.com, or you can also DM us at the socials, and our handle is at talksouthasiantome. All right. Bye.
Bye. Catch you at the next one.
Woohoo.